I never thought I'd be the one to tell this story. My name is Thomas Ellsworth, and I've been chasing political scandals in Washington, D.C. for 23 years. I've seen presidents lie, senators fall, and powerful men crumble under the weight of their own secrets. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found in a dusty archive room in the Library of Congress on a cold November morning in 2019. The manila folder was thin, almost dismissive in its appearance. Someone had written ER Personal Correspondence 1932 to 1945 in faded blue ink across the top. Inside were 12 letters, each one more intimate than the last, each one signed with a single initial, L. Eleanor Roosevelt, First Lady of the United States for 12 years, humanitarian, diplomat, and one of the most respected women in American history, had a secret that could have destroyed everything she built, and I was holding the proof in my trembling hands. Let me take you back to where this all began. Not for me, for her. To 1932, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was about to become president and Eleanor was about to meet the woman who would change her life forever. The White House smelled of old wood and fresh paint that spring. Eleanor walked through the East Wing, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. She was 47 years old, and she felt ancient. Her marriage to Franklin was a political arrangement by this point, cordial, strategic, but hollow. His affair with Lucy Mercer had killed whatever romance they once shared. She had forgiven him, publicly at least, but the wound never healed. She was lonely in a way that wealth and power could never fill. That's when she met Lorena Hickok. Mrs. Roosevelt? A woman's voice, rough and confident, cut through the silence of the hallway. Eleanor turned to see a stocky woman in a man's suit, a press badge hanging from her neck, a cigarette tucked behind her ear. Lorena Hickok, Associated Press. I was hoping to get a few minutes of your time. Eleanor smiled politely, the same smile she'd given 1,000 reporters before. Of course, Miss Hickok, though I'm not sure I have anything interesting to say. Oh, I doubt that. Lorena's eyes, sharp, blue, knowing, locked onto Eleanor's. Everyone has a story, Mrs. Roosevelt. The question is whether they're brave enough to tell it. Something shifted in that moment. Eleanor felt it in her chest, a flutter she hadn't experienced in years. This woman wasn't like the others. She didn't want a quote for tomorrow's paper. She wanted something deeper. She wanted to see Eleanor. "Walk with me," Eleanor said, her voice softer than she intended. They walked through the rose garden, talking about everything and nothing. Lorena asked questions no one else dared to ask. How did Eleanor really feel about being First Lady? What did she dream about when she was alone? What made her afraid? Being invisible, Eleanor answered honestly, surprising herself. I'm afraid that when this is all over, when Franklin's presidency ends, I'll just disappear. That I'll have spent my entire life being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's symbol, and never just me. Lorena stopped walking. She took the cigarette from behind her ear and lit it, taking a long drag before speaking. Then don't let that happen. It's not that simple. Isn't it? Lorena's smile was crooked, challenging. You're the First Lady of the United States, Eleanor. If you can't live the life you want, who can? Eleanor didn't have an answer, but she knew in that moment that Lorena Hickok was going to become important to her. Dangerously important. The letters started 3 weeks later. Eleanor would never forget the first one. It arrived in a plain envelope, addressed simply to ER in careful handwriting. Inside was a single page, and the words made her heart race in a way she thought she'd forgotten how to feel. Eleanor, I can't stop thinking about our conversation in the garden. You said you were afraid of being invisible, but I need you to know something. When I look at you, I see everything. I see strength and sadness, courage and fear, beauty that has nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with spirit. I see you, and I don't think I can unsee you. Yours, L. Eleanor read the letter 7 times that night, alone in her bedroom while Franklin slept down the hall. Her hands shook as she held the paper. She knew what this was. She knew what it meant. And she knew she should burn it, forget it, pretend it never arrived. Instead, she wrote back, Lorena, your letter found me at a moment when I desperately needed to be found. I don't know what this is or what it means, but I know that I felt more alive in those 30 minutes with you than I have in years. Perhaps that makes me selfish. Perhaps that makes me weak. But I'm tired of pretending I don't feel lonely, that I don't ache for connection, that I don't want to be seen exactly the way you described. What do we do with this? What can we do? E. What followed was a correspondence that would span 13 years and over 3,000 letters. Some were innocent, discussions of politics, social issues, daily frustrations, but many were not. They were love letters in every sense of the word, filled with longing and passion and a tenderness that Eleanor had never allowed herself to express before. I want to hold you close, so close. I ache to put my arms around you. I miss you desperately. Lorena's responses were equally ardent. I've been trying all day to bring back your face, to remember just how you looked. Most clearly, I remember your eyes, with a kind of teasing smile in them, and the feeling of that soft spot just northeast of the corner of your mouth against my lips. They weren't hiding what this was, not from each other, but they were hiding it from everyone else. J. Edgar Hoover knew. The director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation made it his business to know everyone's secrets, especially those of the people in power. And Eleanor Roosevelt, with her progressive politics and her independent spirit, was someone Hoover watched closely. In 1943, an internal FBI memo landed on Hoover's desk. I found a copy of it years later, declassified and buried in thousands of other documents. The memo was brief, clinical in its language, but devastating in its implications. Subject: Eleanor Roosevelt. Surveillance of correspondence between E.R. and Lorena Hickok, journalist, formerly ASP, currently employed by Democratic Committee, reveals relationship of intimate nature. Recommend continued monitoring. Files secured under classification level, confidential, executive protection. Hoover didn't leak it. He didn't expose it. He did something far more sinister. He kept it as leverage. Eleanor never knew the FBI was reading her letters. She never knew that Hoover had compiled a file on her relationship with Lorena, with surveillance reports, intercepted correspondence, and witness testimonies from White House staff who had seen the two women together. She never knew that her secret was Hoover's insurance policy, a weapon he could deploy if she or Franklin ever moved against him. And Hoover would keep that file until his death in 1972, long before Eleanor had passed away. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to when Eleanor and Lorena were still living in their beautiful, dangerous bubble. They found ways to be together. Lorena moved into a small apartment just blocks from the White House. Eleanor would visit her there, slipping out of official engagements early, making excuses about needing rest or having personal errands. Her Secret Service detail knew, of course. They saw everything, but they were loyal to her, and they understood that the First Lady deserved some small corner of her life that was hers alone. "I brought you something," Eleanor said one evening in December 1934. Entering her apartment with snowflakes melting in her hair, she held out a small wrapped package. Lorena opened it to find a delicate sapphire ring. "Eleanor, I can't," she said. She broke off, taking a deep breath. "You can, you will," Eleanor said, her voice firm but gentle. "I want you to have something of mine, something that reminds you that this is real, that you are real to me." Lorena's eyes filled with tears. "What are we doing? We can't." "I know," Eleanor said, her voice breaking slightly. "I know all the reasons why this is impossible, but I don't care. For once in my life, I'm choosing what I want. I'm choosing you." They held each other in that small apartment while snow fell outside, and for a few hours, they weren't the First Lady and the journalist. They were just Eleanor and Lorena, two women trying to find happiness in a world that would never accept what they had. But reality has a way of crashing back in. Franklin knew. He never said it directly, that wasn't his style, but he knew. How could he not? He saw the way Eleanor lit up when Lorena visited. He noticed the letters that arrived daily, the way her wife would retreat to her private study to read them, emerging with flushed cheeks and a softness in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years. Part of him was relieved, I think. His own affair with Lucy Mercer had destroyed their romantic relationship, but it had also freed them both from the pretense of passion. They could be partners, allies, friends even, but not lovers. Eleanor's relationship with Lorena allowed Franklin to pursue his own interests without guilt. But there was a political calculation too. Franklin was a master strategist, and he understood that Eleanor's secret made her vulnerable. Not to him, he would never use it against her, but to others, to men like Hoover, to political enemies who would destroy her, and by extension, his presidency if they ever found out. So he did something unexpected. He protected her. In 1936, when rumors began to circulate among certain Washington circles about Eleanor's close friendship with Lorena, Franklin quietly hired private investigators to track down the source of the gossip. He found it was a disgruntled former White House staff member who had been fired for theft. Franklin made sure the man was discredited, his claims dismissed as the bitter fantasies of a criminal. He never told Eleanor what he'd done. He didn't need to. This was his way of saying, "I understand. I accept." The war changed everything. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, Eleanor threw herself into war work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She visited troops, inspected defense plants, wrote her daily newspaper column, and traveled constantly. Some said she was the most visible First Lady in history. But I think she was running from the impossible contradiction of her life, running from the guilt, running from the love that sustained her and tormented her in equal measure. Lorena felt the distance growing. The letters became less frequent, less intimate. Eleanor's visits to the apartment stopped almost entirely. When they did see each other, usually at official events where Lorena was present as press, Eleanor was cordial but distant, treating her like any other journalist. "You're pulling away from me," Lorena said during one of their rare private moments in 1943. They were at a war bond rally in New York, and Lorena had pulled Eleanor aside between speeches. "I can feel it." "I'm not pulling away, I'm just busy." "Don't lie to me, Eleanor. Please don't lie to me. Everyone else in your life gets the polished, perfect version of you. I thought I was the one person who got the truth." Eleanor's composure cracked. "The truth is that I'm exhausted, Lorena. I'm exhausted from trying to be everything to everyone. I'm exhausted from living in fear that someone will discover us and everything I've worked for will be destroyed. I'm exhausted from loving you so much it hurts." "Then stop fighting it. Stop being afraid." "I can't." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "I can't lose everything. Not even for you." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Lorena's face went pale, then hard. "I see. I've always been a secret you were ashamed of. That's not fair, isn't it?" Lorena stepped back, creating physical distance that matched the emotional chasm opening between them. "You wear Franklin's ring. You smile for cameras as his wife. But me? I'm hidden away, something you only acknowledge in letters you're terrified anyone will ever read." "Lorena, please." "I'm tired too, Eleanor. I'm tired of being your secret. I'm tired of loving someone who can never really choose me." Lorena walked away, leaving Eleanor standing alone in a corridor of the hotel, surrounded by the sounds of patriotic music and people celebrating the war effort. Eleanor had never felt more isolated in her life. They tried to make it work. God, how they tried. But the end was inevitable, and they both knew it. After Franklin's death in April 1945, Eleanor was no longer First Lady, no longer protected by the bubble of presidential power. She was just a widow, trying to figure out who she was without the role that had defined her for 12 years. "Maybe now we can be together," Lorena said hopefully when they met a few months after Franklin's funeral. "You're free now, Eleanor. We could travel together, live together, stop hiding." But Eleanor shook her head. "I'm not free. I'll never be free. The world is watching me now more than ever, watching to see what I'll do, who I'll become. If we were together openly, everything I want to accomplish, all the work I still need to do for civil rights, for the United Nations, for women, it would all be overshadowed by scandal. So I'm supposed to wait? Keep being your secret? I'm not asking you to wait, I'm asking you to understand. I've understood for 13 years, Eleanor. I've understood while you chose your image over me, your work over me, your fear over me. I can't do it anymore. The breakup wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming, no thrown objects, no theatrical declarations. It was quiet and sad and inevitable, like watching a terminally ill patient finally slip away after a long illness. They remained friends of a sort. They exchanged letters occasionally, polite and distant. They saw each other at events, but the intimacy was gone, replaced by a formality that hurt more than anger ever could. Lorena Hickok never had another serious relationship. She lived alone, working various jobs, writing a biography of Eleanor that carefully edited out the true nature of their relationship. She kept every letter Eleanor had ever sent her, hiding them away, protecting Eleanor's secret even after being rejected. When Lorena died in 1968, she left instructions that the letters should be donated to the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library, but sealed for 10 years. She wanted the truth known, but not until after she was gone, not until enough time had passed that it couldn't hurt Eleanor's legacy. Or maybe she wanted revenge of a sort, a way of saying, you may have hidden me in life, but history will know I existed. History will know you loved me. I found those letters in 2019, more than 50 years after Lorena's death, 70 years after the affair had ended. They had been open to researchers in 1978, but most scholars at the time dismissed them as intense female friendship, a common phrase used to explain away any hint of romantic or sexual relationships between women in that era. But when I read them, really read them, there was no mistaking what they were. These weren't letters of friends. They were love letters, passionate and intimate and heartbreaking. I wish I could lie down beside you tonight and take you in my arms, Eleanor wrote in 1935. The memory of your eyes, your laugh, the way you looked at me last Tuesday, it's all I think about, Lorena replied. How had everyone missed this? How had historians, biographers, scholars, people who spent their entire lives studying Eleanor Roosevelt, looked at these letters and seen only friendship? The answer, I realized, was that they didn't want to see it. Eleanor Roosevelt was an icon, a symbol of strength and traditional values. To suggest she had been in love with a woman, that she had lived a double life, that she had hidden a fundamental part of herself from the public, it complicated the narrative. It made her human in ways that made people uncomfortable. But as I sat in that archive room, reading letter after letter, I realized something. This didn't diminish Eleanor. It made her extraordinary. She had lived in an era when what she felt was considered a crime, a mental illness, a moral failing. She had been married to one of the most famous men in the world, living under constant scrutiny. And yet, she had found a way to love, to feel, to be herself, even if it had to be hidden, even if it cost her. She had chosen to be human rather than perfect, and that took more courage than any speech she ever gave. But there was more to the story. There always is. As I dug deeper, I found the FBI files that had been declassified in 2012 as part of a routine document dump. Tucked away in thousands of pages about communist investigations and civil rights surveillance were the files on Eleanor Roosevelt. Hoover had known everything. He'd known about the letters, about the visits to Lorena's apartment, about the ring Eleanor had given her. He'd compiled witness statements from Secret Service agents, housekeepers, and White House staff. He'd documented it all with the meticulous attention of a man who understood that information was power. But why hadn't he ever used it? Why hadn't he leaked it to destroy Eleanor, a woman whose liberal politics he despised? The answer was in another memo I found, dated 1947. Eleanor had been appointed as a delegate to the United Nations, and she was drafting what would become the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Hoover had written to President Truman, urging him to remove Eleanor from the position, calling her a security risk. Truman's response was brief. Mrs. Roosevelt stays. If you have evidence of actual wrongdoing, present it. If not, this discussion is over.
Hoover had blinked. He couldn't present his evidence without revealing that the FBI had been conducting illegal surveillance on a former presidential wife. The scandal of the surveillance would have been worse than the scandal of Eleanor's relationship. So he'd kept the file, kept the secret, and Eleanor never knew how close she'd come to exposure. But someone else had known. Someone had been protecting Eleanor, quietly covering tracks, ensuring that the evidence stayed buried. It was Franklin's chief of staff, Lewis Ho, the man who'd been with the Roosevelts since Franklin's earliest political campaigns. Lewis had died in 1936, but before he did, he'd set up a system. He'd cultivated relationships with key FBI agents, established protocols for intercepting sensitive information, created a network of loyalists who would warn him if anyone started asking questions about Eleanor's personal life. Lewis Ho, a man most people barely remembered, had been Eleanor's silent guardian. He'd known about Lorena, and he'd made sure no one else could destroy Eleanor with that knowledge. I found this out through interviews with Howe's descendants, who had kept some of his private papers. In a letter to his daughter written shortly before his death, Lewis wrote, "Eleanor Roosevelt is the finest person I've ever known. She deserves happiness, and she deserves privacy. I've spent my life in politics, watching powerful men indulge every vice imaginable while maintaining their public images. If Eleanor has found someone who makes her feel loved, who cares for her, who am I, who is anyone to judge her for it? I'll protect her secret with my last breath, not because I'm afraid of scandal, but because she's earned the right to live her life on her own terms." This revelation hit me hard. Eleanor hadn't been alone in her secret. She'd had allies, protectors, people who loved her enough to shield her from the consequences of her own humanity.
So what do we do with this information now? What do we do with the knowledge that one of America's most beloved first ladies lived a secret life, that she loved a woman in an era when that love was unthinkable? Some people, when I've shared this research, have been angry. They feel betrayed, as if Eleanor had lied to them personally. Others have been dismissive, insisting that I'm reading too much into female friendship and imposing modern interpretations on historical relationships. But here's what I think. Eleanor Roosevelt's relationship with Lorena Hickok doesn't diminish her legacy. It enriches it. She was a woman living in impossible circumstances, trying to balance who she was with what the world demanded she be. She found love in an unexpected place, and she fought to hold on to it even when it would have been easier to let it go. She made sacrifices, painful ones, because she believed her public work was more important than her private happiness. Was that the right choice? I don't know. I'm not sure she knew either. In one of her last letters to Lorena, written in 1960, Eleanor reflected on their relationship. "I've been thinking about our years together, and I realize now that I was asking you to live in shadows so I could stand in the light. That wasn't fair, and I'm sorry. You deserved better than what I could give you. But please know that loving you was the realest thing in my life, even when I couldn't show it the way you needed me to." Lorena never responded to that letter. Maybe she couldn't. Or maybe she finally understood what Eleanor had been trying to say all along, that love and duty don't always align, that sometimes you have to choose between your heart and your purpose, and that choosing purpose doesn't mean your heart was never real. I've been carrying this story for 5 years now, trying to figure out how to tell it, whether I even should tell it. Eleanor Roosevelt is dead since 1962, Lorena Hickok since 1968. Everyone directly involved is gone. But their letters remain. The FBI files remain. The truth remains. And I believe Eleanor would want it told, not because she was proud of hiding, I think that shame followed her to her grave, but because she would want other people, especially young women struggling with their own identities, to know they're not alone. Eleanor Roosevelt, the woman who said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent," spent decades feeling inferior because of who she loved. She was human, she was flawed, she was afraid, and she was brave anyway. That's the story no one tells about Eleanor Roosevelt.
Not this sanitized version we teach in schools, where she's a feminist icon who stood up for civil rights and helped draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Not this simplified narrative where she's just FDR's wife who overcame his infidelity to become her own person. The real story is messier. It's about a woman who loved deeply and secretly, who sacrificed her own happiness for what she believed was a greater good, who lived with contradictions she could never fully resolve. That's the Eleanor Roosevelt I wish I'd learned about growing up. Not a perfect symbol, but a real woman, complicated, conflicted, deeply human. As I write this, I'm sitting in my office in Washington, D.C., surrounded by copies of those letters, FBI memos, interview transcripts, and photographs. I have a picture of Eleanor and Lorena on my desk, one of the few photos of them together that survives. They're standing in front of the White House in 1933, and if you look carefully, you can see Lorena's hand reaching toward Eleanor's, stopping just short of touching. That almost touch says everything. I think about them often. I think about the life they could have had in a different era, a different world. I think about Lorena growing old alone, protecting Eleanor's secret until her last breath. I think about Eleanor in her final years, looking back on her life and wondering if she'd made the right choices. There's no happy ending here. This isn't a story about love conquering all, because it didn't. This is a story about love existing anyway, even when it couldn't conquer anything, even when it had to hide. But maybe that's its own kind of triumph. Maybe the fact that Eleanor and Lorena found each other at all, that they carved out moments of genuine connection in a world determined to keep them apart, that they loved each other despite knowing it could never be publicly acknowledged, maybe that matters. Maybe that's enough. I've spent 23 years chasing political scandals, and I've learned that everyone in power has secrets. Some are venal, some are criminal, some are simply human. Eleanor Roosevelt's secret was that she was capable of profound love, and she lived in a time when that particular love was considered shameful. History has tried to erase that love, to redefine it as friendship, to pretend it was something less than what it was. But the letters don't lie, the FBI files don't lie, and Eleanor's own words, written in private moments when she thought no one would ever read them, don't lie. She loved Lorena Hickok deeply, passionately, impossibly, and that love, hidden, denied, sacrificed, shaped the woman who became one of the most important figures in American history. So when you think about Eleanor Roosevelt, don't just remember the First Lady who championed civil rights, or the diplomat who helped create the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the activist who fought for social justice until her last days. Remember the woman who loved Lorena Hickok. Remember the woman who wrote, "I ache to hold you close," and meant every word. Remember the woman who chose her public mission over her private happiness and lived with that choice every day for the rest of her life. She was human, flawed, afraid, lonely, and she was brave anyway. That's the real Eleanor Roosevelt. That's the story that matters. And it's a story that, after 70 years of hiding in sealed letters and classified files, finally deserves to be told.